Who can do back extensions? In this episode, we're going to try and understand the back extension a little bit more. We're going to try and demystify some of the information that's out there, put it into context, look at some nuances about the information, maybe look at some assumptions as well. So we'll hopefully understand by the end of this who is most suited to doing back extensions and who is maybe least suited to do back extensions. To start with, we're going to look at what people say back extensions do. Now, it's very simple. They strengthen and stabilise the lower back. Now, in some respects, this does happen. So that, let's just say, is the reward that comes with doing a back extension, but there are risks as well, which is what we're going to talk about. But just to go back to the strengthening and stabilising part. Now, again, they're talking about strengthening and stabilising the lower back. Now, the idea of a back extension comes from, the best way I can describe it is like a bodybuilding idea or philosophy of training, which is essentially to break down the body into its muscles and then train those muscles. So, for example, if you want to train your arms, you do bicep curls, and then you do tricep extensions. Legs, you do your quads, your hamstrings, your calves. So you've got all these different muscles that the body's been broken up into, and then to make those muscles stronger, you train them. The back extension comes from that idea of training. So it's come along, people have assumed that there is a weak lower back, so they've gone with the idea at the time, which is the bodybuilding idea. Well, we need to strengthen these muscles. So how do we do that? Well, the back muscles work to extend the spine, so therefore we will extend the spine and work those muscles. Strength will come with that, and in some respects stability will come with that as well. But as I mentioned before, there are risks to that, which we'll discuss in the next part. So there is truth, and this is where, in some respects I can agree with people. The lower back will strengthen, but that isn't exclusive to the back extension. As I've mentioned, there are risks that come with it, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next part. And this is what else does the back extension do. So there is no denying, as I've described, there is a strengthening and stabilising element to the back extension. Now, what are these risks that come with it? There are high levels of compression around the spine, number one. Now, if you have a spine if you have back pain, and the back pain is enhanced or triggered by compression. So what I mean by compression, there are two types of compression. Axial compression, which is a load on the top of the spine, compressing it down, and then there is another compression, which is like the best way I've found to describe it is you've got a sponge in your hand and you squeeze the sponge like that. It's like you're squeezing water out of a sponge, and then obviously the water comes out. So that's another type of compression. So you get high levels of compression with a back extension. Now, if you have a deconditioned back that isn't great at coping with lots of compression because it's a step too far, or it's you jumping in at the deep end, if you will, then it's not going to be the most effective. As I mentioned before, if you have back pain that doesn't like compression, then again, it's probably not going to be the most effective exercise. And what I mean by that is, if you are tested and assessed and gone through a suitable consultation which questions triggers of lower back pain, and it comes out that you have intolerances in your lower back around compression, then it's probably not going to be the most effective exercise. So let's just say two categories of people might be people who have got back pain which don't like compression, and potentially I have to remember that word because some people take what I say out of context. Potentially new people to the low back strengthening arena, if you will, because it could be, and again, highlight that word, could be a step too far. They could be jumping in at the deep end. So we have to understand that as well. And as coaches and as trainers, we have to understand the people that we are giving this to. Hence, we need to take them through some degree of a consultation, asking them questions, and then some sort of physical assessment to understand this. The second things that they do is is the flexion and extension cycle. So when you go either down into the back extension, so if you're on one of the machines that I have at the gym, you go down and then you come back up. That's known as a flexion extension cycle because your spine goes into flexion and then goes into extension. Now, these flexion and extension cycles have been associated with problems with the facet joints. They have been associated with intervertebral disc delamination and intervertebral disc prolapse herniation or bulging. So we have to understand that, again, that is a mechanism of injury. So that flexion extension cycle is a mechanism of injury to the spine. Now, there are people that will complain about that and not like that as a comment or whatever, but as far as I'm aware, and I've read it from multiple sources over multiple decades, and it seems to be consistent information that the flexion extension cycle is a contributor to those types of injuries. And then when you add load to the flexion extension cycles, it only speeds up that mechanism. So again, this would go towards if you were someone who had a spine or a lower back that pain was triggered in flexion or extension, it's probably a useful thing to not do the back extension. So that would be another part of it. Another one is anterior shear. So when you are lifting with a flexed spine, so again, if you've got if you're going into that flexed position in a back extension, when the spine is in a flexed position, you get anterior shear. So the vertebra above wants to essentially fall off the front of the spine. It's not going to, but forces pulling on the spine are sort of creating that mechanism. Now, when you maintain the neutral posture, the muscles of the lower back create a posterior shear force. So essentially, that force gets neutralized. So again, forces on the spine are more evenly distributed. They're not, when it's flexed, they're not more pulled forwards. It's more evenly distributed. So again, that has to be understood when we're talking about a lower back exercise and a person's lower back. Because again, if they've got back pain, if we're starting to understand that their spine is irritated by shear forces, then it's probably not going to be useful to do a back extension. Again, you can do what you like. That's not my argument here. I'm not telling you to stop doing it. It's about giving you the information as to why back extensions may not be so useful. And as I've mentioned before, they put, certainly in the extension cycle, they put unnecessary load through the facet joints and can cause irritation there. So again, you get irritation through the disc, you get irritation through the facet joints, you get irritation through the anterior shear forces of it. So if you've got a spine that you know is irritated by any of those, it's probably not useful to start doing it. If you've got someone, or if you are doing it and it irritates the lower back, again, it's probably not a useful thing to be doing. So these are some of the risks that come with it, because every exercise has risk, every exercise has reward. We've just got to understand the thing that happens with a lot of information out there is they'll either only look at the risk or they'll only look at the reward. And then that will give them the bias to tell people what exercises to do or to not do. But when we understand the different risks and rewards of the exercise and the different amounts of risk and different amounts of reward that come with it, because what also will happen is it's not only the physical posture or motion that you go through, it's also the dosage of the exercise. Because if you go and do one back extension now with a bad back, it's probably not going to have that much of an effect. It may irritate it, but it may not, or it may just have such a small effect that it doesn't really matter. The body will recover from that and you'll be able to carry on. But if you went away and did 50 of them, it's probably going to cause that much more of a problem. And then if you did 50 of them 3 times a week or 5 times a week or whatever it may be, then again, that's only going to be enhanced, if you will. So the physical mechanism is a problem, but also the dosage of that mechanism is more of a problem. So again, that has to be taken into it. So there's not only a posture element that needs to be taken into selecting exercises, there is also a dosage, which again has to be understood well enough by the person either choosing the exercise, be it a therapist or trainer, or the client themselves, or the person using the gym themselves. So that's sort of some ideas of what else the back extension is doing. What we'll now start to look at is how we then go about training the lower back. We've looked at how you might go about training the lower back sort of loosely, but what we'll try and do is tie it in and make it a little bit more specific, because we've sort of obviously talked about it. We've talked about dosage, we've talked about posture and technique and things like that, but what we'll start to do now is just sort of pull that in. So if we go back to the current idea, which is the bodybuilding type thing where we isolate the muscles off. Now, if we look at that in a wider sort of perspective, and we look at the legs as an example. So you might think, well, if I make my quads stronger, my glutes stronger, my hamstrings stronger, that's going to make my squat stronger. And there is some truth to that. But what we have to understand is that a squat is done best when the right muscle times at the right time, if that makes sense. So there are quads, there are glutes, there are hamstrings working throughout that, and the body will sort of naturally want to sequence those muscles as we go down into the squat and back out of the squat. The exact same thing would be said about the arms and the shoulders, and the exact same thing can be said about the lower back. So the assumption is that if you've got a strong lower back, or if you do back extensions, you will get a stronger lower back. In part, that is true, but a strong lower back isn't just about the lower back muscles. It's about the mid-back muscles. It's about the anterior and lateral core muscles. It's about the glute muscles. So where you may strengthen the lower back muscles, which will give you a strong lower back, you haven't really got a strong lower back because there are so many more players in the game, and I'll be able to explain that later. Now again, if you were to strengthen the lower back with back extensions, and then do some mid-back extensions, and then do some sort of glute bridges or whatever, then again there's an assumption there that, well, I'm making them all strong, therefore they're all going to work together. And again, that's not entirely true, because the sequences happen with movement. So where we can strengthen certain muscles, we have to sequence them in certain ways, with certain exercises, with certain stretching and foam rolling or massage or whatever it may be. But that again will come out from a trained individual who understands what's going on when you do exercises, and based on questions and feedback that's given, you will understand what's going on in the lower back and what's needed. Do you need massage? Do you need stretching? Do you need this exercise or that exercise to bring it all together? So again, the assumption is that individual muscles, strong individual muscles, it will just all come together and it'll all be fine. So I can just train all my individual muscles and keep them strong. What we have to understand is we have to train muscles together, because what we have is we have like a junction box. And the junction box where everything comes together is the thoracolumbar fascia, which is essentially the fascia that goes around the abdominal. It's all the same thing. You've got the abdominal fascia, which is connected to the thoracolumbar fascia. It's just the position of it. So the position of the thoracolumbar fascia is essentially, it's a diamond over the lower back that obviously goes into the mid back. But essentially, it's all the same material. But this is where all these muscles come together, and that's what we need to be able to bring together, and that's where we need to bring it together. So we need to use exercise to work muscles, but we also need to use exercises to bring them together. So we need to bring the lats and the glutes together. We need to bring the mid-back muscles in with the lats. We need to bring the lats, the mid-back muscles and the glutes together. So you can start to see we're building a picture. Then we need to bring in the other core muscles as well. Now, obviously, we have to do that in a variety of exercises, but there are exercises where we can start using more and more and more of them. So, again, if we've got a healthy lower back, then there may be some argument for using a back extension. But as I mentioned, the motion of that is a mechanism for injuries. So, again, it's not necessary. There are other exercises that can do its job. But if we were doing them in low dose on a perfectly healthy back, we could probably use it in a wider type of program. Again, that's probably fine. It would depend on the individual. But so what we need to understand is we need to bring these muscles together. So what we'll do in the next part is we'll start looking at more about people who should be doing it, and people who could be doing it, and people who probably shouldn't be doing it. If we bring lower back pain into the argument, I've kind of described this before because of all the different risks that come with it. So if you get lower back pain, so if you are assessed and questioned and it's understood that your back doesn't like compression or flexion extension, or it has problems with shear forces, mainly the anterior shear force, then it's probably not a good idea, or pain comes out through the facet joints or is irritated through the facet joints, then it's probably not a good idea to do back extensions. But there are also some other things that I look for with regards to using lower back, and essentially it's three things. So does your pain get irritated during the exercise? Does your pain get irritated after doing the exercise? Or does your pain get irritated 24 to 48 hours after the exercise? So if you don't know, if you haven't been assessed for compression, flexion extension, and anterior shear forces, if you haven't been assessed for that, a simple way to understand to stop doing it is just very simply, does it cause me pain while I'm doing it? Does it cause me pain while after I finish doing it? And is back pain enhanced in the preceding, post-seeding 24 to 48 hours? If it is, it's probably not a useful thing to be doing, because you're constantly gonna have that. So we need to rethink what we're doing. So if you have been assessed, great. If you haven't been assessed, then those are probably three good sort of feedback times to think, okay, this doesn't seem like a useful thing to do. Although people are telling me to do it, it aggravates my pain during, after it, and in the preceding 24 to 48 hours. If that's the case, it's probably not a good idea to keep doing it. The next one, as I've talked about, we've got the triggers. So is it compression, the trigger? So you do one thing and the compression's a problem. Flexion or extension, if you do one of them, are you getting pain? What we then get is the dosage of it. So we start to then bring in endurance. Now, endurance is multiple reps. So we have to understand, is endurance a problem? If pain comes on at rep 20, maybe we should be doing about 10. Again, to stay within that tolerance, because everyone has pain tolerance. This is another thing about the neutral spine argument and spine flexion argument. Okay, I could go down and flex my spine, pick one thing up once and it not be a problem. But I could pick that same thing up 20 times, or, you know, a repeated task of picking something up 20 times and my back's a problem. Again, neutral spine, endurance is the problem and the spine flexion. So if I keep my spine in neutral, I can lift it up 20 times. But everyone has their tolerances. So if I go down and pick something up once, okay, fine, I can get away with it. But if I do it repeated times, I'm not going to get away with it. It's the same with back extensions. We have to understand that when we are choosing these exercises. Not only what is the trigger, is what are my tolerances for that as well. So it's very important that endurance is a part of it. Can I cope with 1 rep? Can I cope with 10 reps? Can I cope with 50 reps? We have to understand that. Then the other one is the range of movement. Can I cope with full flexion and full extension? Do I need to manage my movement within it? Again, all I'm saying is it's an unnecessary exercise. There are plenty of other exercises where you can get the benefits of what back extensions give you, but with reduced risk. So certainly for people starting out, and certainly people with back pain and specific types of back pain, it's probably useful just avoiding it for now. You may want to bring it in later, but again, there are other exercises that can do just as good job without the risk. So we have to understand all these different things with it. If we are talking about people without back pain, again, that's another judgment call, because now we understand that we are putting unnecessary anterior shear forces on the spine. We're putting unnecessary forces through the vertebra. We're putting unnecessary forces through the facet joints. We're putting unnecessary forces through the intervertebral discs. Potentially over time, and again that's important to remember, is that potentially over time that could cause us a problem, because again, most of back pain doesn't happen in one thing, which is what I described. I can go down and pick up a box once, it's not going to cause me a problem, but if I do that 20 times, it might cause me a problem. It depends on my tolerances. So what it comes down to is the individual knowing themselves, or the coach or the trainer knowing the individual well enough to know that they can cope with 1 rep of it, they can cope with 50 reps of it, they can cope with doing just once a training session, or once a week within a wider training session, or they can cope with doing it 3 times a week. All of that has to be understood. They don't get aggravated during the exercise, they don't get aggravated during immediately after, they don't get aggravated during the next 24 to 48 hours. So again, all these different things need to be understood, and this isn't just for back extensions, this is for multiple exercises. We're just using back extensions as the example because it's such an interested in topic. There are many people that comment on this agreeing with me. There are many people on here that disagree with me about this, and that's absolutely fine. Again, from all the bits that I've read and all the questions that I've been answered, I haven't found anything that's enough to make me doubt what I've been saying, because I seem to be one of the few people that look at it in very specific contexts and go into deeper detail about the specifics of the individual, not necessarily about the exercise, but the individual and what are their tolerances, what are their pain patterns, so on and so forth, what are their strength levels, all of this type of stuff, and then you can make a better judgment on it. But again, there hasn't been anyone that's questioned me that's been convincing enough, or the question hasn't been well constructed enough to doubt what I'm sharing and to doubt my understanding of what the back extension can do to someone. But the determining factor is the individual. So it's all well and good saying back extensions don't do this and back extensions don't do that. A lot of what I'm saying is, yeah, but there's an individual within this that can't cope with X or can't cope with Y. So why are you giving them an exercise that does X and that does Y? So all these different things need to be understood about exercise selections, because how I've always thought about it is I'm not trying to fit a person to the exercise, I'm trying to fit an exercise to the person. That's always been my slant on selecting exercises, is what's the most suitable exercise for them in their condition. The only difference with me is I know more variables about exercises and I know more components about the individual. Because yes, they may need to get stronger. Okay, well, back extensions might seem like a good idea for that. But their spine doesn't like this, or we're already doing this exercise, or their spine doesn't like that, or their spine can't cope with this, or it has a tolerance of that. Which then makes me think, well, it's probably not necessary. I can get what I need out of the lower back with this exercise or that exercise, so I don't need that one. And again, it just comes down to me not needing the exercise. So it just seems unnecessary for more people to do it. So I can go on and on and on about this, but I shan't. I shall digress, come back and just say, again, as I've mentioned, hopefully this has been helpful for you. Hopefully it's given you a better idea of the back extension and what it can do, and the individuals that maybe should and shouldn't be doing it, or could and couldn't be doing it. So yes, many thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed the content, hit the like button. If you want to watch more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. If you've got any comments or questions, leave it in the comment section below. And if you've learned something new, please do hit the thanks button. And yes, many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.